How to do strength training at home. In this episode, we talk about how to do strength training at home, what are important factors to consider when we do strength training at home, and what are possible shortcomings of doing strength training at home. Stay tuned. Hey and welcome back, it's Christian. So how do we actually do strength training at home? First and foremost, it's important to understand that when we do training, we want to set a stimulus. What that means is training needs to have a following reaction. So in order to achieve that, training needs to be heavy. Yeah? I'm not saying heavy. Heavy is a very relative term. But for example, if I have a bottle of water and I lift it off the ground, there is some strength required to do that. But it's not going to set a stimulus that makes me stronger. So, first and foremost, we need to think about when we are at home, we need to use an external resistance that is high enough to set a stimulus. So remember the story of Milos of Crotona. When he was a young boy, he lifted a calf. And he lifted that calf every day. And over time, that calf grew into a bull until the day when he lifted a full bull. So that shows the example of setting a stimulus. So he starts on day one with a calf that has certain weight. And over time, that calf grows and becomes heavier. And he lifts heavier and heavier loads. And therefore, he sets a stimulus to ultimately become the strongest man on earth in his era. So if we apply that concept to strength training and strength training at home, we need to find exercises that are challenging when we start, but we need to find progressions that once we can do a certain exercise, let's name it such as a push-up, we start and maybe we can do 2. And over time we increase, at some point we can do 5, 8, 10, 12, maybe 15, maybe 20. If we can do 20, the intensity is not that high anymore that it's a real strength training. It becomes more of a strength endurance training. So we need to find progressions that we make this exercise more challenging in order to continue to set a stimulus. So for example, in the push-up, we could think about elevating the feet. So then the push-up also becomes a bit more difficult. So with this in mind, we need to design a training program that is challenging when we start, but also ensures that it maintains challenging over time. So for example, the push-up we just covered, we can do a normal push-up. After that, we can elevate the feet, we can do push-ups. But at some point, it'll become very, very difficult to overload that pattern. Maybe we can do it with one arm, but we will hit a point where it's very difficult to overload that pattern. So this is the point where then it'll become difficult to do a strength training at home, because if we really think about setting a stimulus and using heavier and heavier resistance, we need to get some equipment, or we need to go somewhere where there is equipment, so basically meaning a gym. Another problem we are facing when we do strength training at home is that it's not that easy to do all exercises at home. So the way I think about training is not necessarily thinking about muscles, but thinking about movements. And that means, for example, we have a squatting pattern, we have a pushing pattern horizontally, we have a pushing pattern vertically, we also have a pulling pattern horizontally, and we have a pulling pattern vertically. And there you can already see the difficulty. So if we do, for example, a pulling horizontally or a pulling vertically, we need to have some equipment. So for example, the pulling from above, we either need to have something that we can pull down, or we need to have a bar where we can do pull-ups. So this is another difficulty of strength training at home, that we have difficulties training all movement patterns. We can work around that. We can use resistance bands. We can use, oh, now I can't really think of anything else, but sorry for that. So we can use resistance bands, or we can, for example, get a bar that we can attach to the door frame. But yeah, at some point it'll become difficult. And I would advise everyone who considers training at home to familiarize with the thought that if you're really serious of doing it, you might have to go to a gym at some point in time in the future. Yeah? So to start out, it's good to do strength training at home, and doing training is always better than doing no training. But if your goal is really becoming stronger over time, I'm afraid you need to find a gym.